All right, so now we've got our filled cake that has been chilled through to the center. You want that cake to chill for at least 5 or 6 hours overnight if you've got the time. And that's the thing about making a fondant cake is you need to plan ahead. You cannot make and decorate it all on the same day. It's a several day process. And because it's all of the chilling through the different stages that make it very stable and very straight and very workable. So now we've got our chilled cake that we just took out of the fridge. It's cold to the center, so it's nice and solid. You don't want to freeze your cakes ever when they're in this condition unless you have time for it to fully thaw before you put the frosting on the outside. If it is frozen and you don't want to put any frosting on it until it thaws completely. So leave it wrapped in plastic until it thaws completely, but still it needs to be refrigerated and cold when you start frosting it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. So, but you also want to always leave it wrapped in plastic to ensure that it does not dry out. So on my little list of items, I always say you need lots and lots of plastic because you want to make sure that that cake does not dry out. All right, so now we can take the plastic off, and at this point we can finally ditch this plastic. We've used it like 3 times now, and it's time to throw it away. All right, so now we've got our cake, and we are going to use the same buttercream that we used for our little walls to fill it with. The Wilton recipe that you can pretty much find online, but just switch out any dairy products for more shortening, or for shortening or water. So shortening for butter and water for milk, if it asks for that, because then it's stable at room temperature. You don't want to have to refrigerate this frosting because it'll take too long to warm back up, and to get it at the right consistency, it's never fun when you have to warm it up and cool it down and whatnot. So if you just make it with shortening water, it doesn't need to be refrigerated, and then you got the perfect temperature all the time. All right. So we're going to use that same frosting once again, in my personal opinion. Not very good for eating because it's mostly made with shortening, because all of our fillings we make with butter and good, like cream and good, yummy ingredients on the inside. Never any shortening on the inside of the cake, only on the outside. But you need that shortening because it stays stable at room temperature. So if you put buttercream on the outside of the cake, it tends to get really soft at room temperature and it's not going to hold up. So that's why we do the shortening-based buttercream on the outside of the cake. All right, well, since we do lots of it here at Center Cakes, we put it in a big, gigantic bucket, but you will probably have like a small mixer bowl at home. So here we go. All right, the way that you need to put the frosting on the cake is you need to start with your offset spatula, preferably your stiff and sturdy one. And the way that you hold your knife, and we're just going to assume for this particular segment that everyone's right-handed, and if you're left-handed, I'm very sorry. We might go over that later because my 6-year-old is left-handed and she's going to eventually have to do this too, so we're going to have to cover that. But for today, we're going to be right-handed, and this is how you hold your knife. So you hold it in your right hand as if you're like, you know, you're holding it like that. And you always want the outside of your knife facing the inside, okay? And I call the outside or the back of it this side. All right, and then when you get your frosting out of your bowl or your bucket or wherever you're getting it from, you want to always to be on the back of your knife because that's the side that's going to go on the cake. And you don't want to frost from over here because it's hard, this is in the way. You always want to hold your knife like this and frost on this side and pull toward you. And this is where it's vital that you have a turntable, because you let the turntable do a lot of the work. You keep your hand in the same position and let the turntable turn your cake. Okay, because it's just the easiest to have control over your knife when you're holding it like this and you've got it over here and you're pulling it towards you. That's where you have the most control. You can see what you're doing and you can, it's just the easiest to work with. So we'll use the back of our knife, get as much frosting as it'll hold on the back of the knife and put it on the side of your cake. And then you just kind of, you want to do like a little twisting motion because once again, like the filling, you don't want to pull your knife or your spatula past the edge of your frosting or you'll pull crumbs into it. So I'll try to turn it toward you. You don't want crumbs to be in this frosting. So if you pull your knife past it, you can drag cake with you. But if you get to the edge of your frosting and you want to pull your knife away, go back and then push it down, and you always do a little swishy motion to pull your knife away, and then it won't take cake with it when it comes off, because if you just pull it off, you'll often pull cake off. So then you want to just make sure that this little gap between the cake and the board is filled in with frosting. So that's usually my first step. Go in, put that frosting all the way around the bottom, making sure that that little gap is all filled in. Okay, you don't want any cake showing when you're done with this step. And you need a fair amount of frosting, sometimes more than you think you should use.
Now this is just a crumb coat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But you want this to be really, really smooth. And so you don't want any cake poking through it. Okay. So we'll just kind of push it around, making sure if you have to go back the other direction, but filling in that little gap down there at the bottom. And this here is a 9-inch cake, and to tell you the truth, the bigger the cake is, the easier it is to crumb coat it. When cakes are small, it's very difficult. So when customers ask me, well, I just want a small cake, oh, it's gonna be double. Because the smaller it is, the more challenging it is, because there's no weight of the cake pushing back at you. And so it makes it a little bit more challenging to crumb coat. So honestly, it's way easier to crumb coat an 11-inch cake than a 6-inch cake. And when you start getting into 4s and 5s, oh, then it's really difficult. So anyway, we just want to make sure that our gap is filled in. So now we've filled in that gap all the way around the bottom of the cake. Okay. So then we want to pull it up, more frosting. Once again, trying never to pull that knife over the frosting. You don't want your knife to ever come in contact with the cake, only frosting. Okay, so we want to kind of pull it up the sides. You don't want to pull it up too high because the corners of your, or the edge of your cake is often where you'll do the most damage by trying to pull frosting either on the top over the side or the side over the top. You want to avoid touching that edge at all costs, because if you want that cake to have that sharp edge, you cannot mess with this baked edge because it already gives you something really good to work with. You don't want to mess that up. So we want to put more frosting kind of up as far as you can on the side of the cake, but without going all the way up. Then the next one, you want to put it on the top. And if you start on the top, once again, if you need to pull your knife away, do your little swishing motion like this, and that'll keep you from pulling cake up. So put enough on there to where you can start and use your turntable. Let your turntable do the work so your hand stays in the same place, and then turn the cake. And you want to push that frosting out over the edge. You see what I'm doing here? Push the frosting out over the edge. All right, so now you've got this frosting hanging over the edge, and now you want to just connect it with the frosting that's on the side, and that's the best way to keep that edge safe, okay, from being torn up by your knife. You'll see when you do your first cake, you'll know what I'm talking about. So be very careful with that edge. And you just kind of have to go back and forth between pushing it around the side, pushing it around the top, pushing it around the side, pushing it around the top. And then you just kind of got to make sure that it's all nice and even around the edge of the cake, and it looks like a ton of frosting. And this is probably a little bit too much, and we will end up pulling some of it off, maybe. It just depends. But you do not want your cake to be skinnier at the top than it is at the bottom, because nothing looks dumpier than a cake shaped like this. If it's not, you want it to be as straight as possible, but if it's not going to be straight, you'd rather have your cake be like this than like this. So if anything, put more frosting around the top than around the bottom. Okay, so it looks to me in here like we've got a fairly decent layer of buttercream to work with, but as you can see, not super straight right now, right? So that's where this tool comes into play, our little dough cutter. And this thing works wonders, because if you want a straight cake, you got to use straight tools. Well, this side is perfectly straight, and this side is perfectly straight. And your turntable, if you've got a good, sturdy, stable one, it should also be perfectly straight. If you've got a plastic one that's kind of wobbly, this may not work perfectly well for you. But if you've got a good turntable, this is all but guaranteed to make you a very, very straight cake. So if you leave your little scraper and make sure that it's sitting level, on the on your turntable, and then it's touching, remember how we talked earlier about your board that your cake is sitting on being your guide? You want it to sit on your turntable and match up with that cardboard. And then you pull it around your cake, and if you do that, you should end up with a very, very straight cake. Okay, so you can kind of see here where we've got some empty spaces. So we had more up top than we had at bottom, so now we've got it on our spatula. What we can do is go around and put it back in those little empty spaces, and then go back and pull it around again. But if you want your cake to be very clean, you have to use a clean tool. So if you've got this much frosting on your tool, it's going to be tough to make a very clean cake. So you can just scrape it back into your bowl that you were using, make your tool as clean as possible again, and then go back, make sure it's level with your turntable, and then touching the board. And if you do that, your cake is going to be very, very, very straight. All right, so there we go. So see, we took a lot of that off. We took a lot of it off, but now we're looking very, very straight. Because our frosting is soft and has some air bubbles in it, it's not going to be perfect the first time around. So we're going to just do the best that we can on this layer, and then we're going to put it back in the refrigerator. We're going to let it sit. You can either put it back in the fridge and let it sit for like an hour, or you can put it in the freezer for, say, 10 minutes and then get it back out. And once this first layer of buttercream hardens a little bit, your second layer will be perfectly smooth. So some people obsess about trying to get it right the first time. It's not important that you get it perfect on the first try, because it's very hard to get frosting that's this soft perfect the first time. And so that's often, you know, the colder your cake is, the easier it is to work with. So since this frosting is room temperature, we're going to just do the very best that we can with it, make it as straight as we possibly can, put it in the fridge, let it chill, then get it back out, and we can do the rest, make the rest of it very, very straight. So now we're taking the excess off of the top of the cake, and you just do that by keeping your tool as straight and level as you can, and just kind of pull it in from the outside. You don't want a lot of this buttercream on the outside of your cake. You need enough to make sure that you have covered the cake and there's not a lot of cake showing through. But if you put too much on, it can create, if it warms up, it creates squishiness and softness on the cake that you don't really want. So here we are. This is our first layer of what I like to call our crumb coat. And it's not perfect, but once we put it in the fridge and then get it back out and work on it some more, then it will be perfect.